Already, let me start. So, hey everyone, this is Darini Chokadia, the event manager and the host of today's live podcast, The Next Experiment by the Scicomm Synapse, a podcast featuring researchers and scientists. I am delighted to welcome our honorable guest and speaker. And today we will be in conversation with Dr. Vinita Gowda, Professor IISER Bhopal, on tracing plant history and evolution. But before we begin, I would like to introduce Scicomm Synapse a bit. The Scicomm Synapse is a science communication enterprise registered as an MSME under the Government of India. Its mission is to bridge the gap between the scientific research and society by transforming complex scientific ideas into accessible and engaging content. Through curated events, interactive workshops, and meaningful discussions, the organization promotes awareness and understanding of science among diverse audiences. It also nurtures a collaborative STEM ecosystem where students, researchers, and enthusiasts can connect, exchange ideas, and grow together. I shall proceed with the introduction of Dr. Vinita Gowda. Dr. Vinita Gowda is an evolutionary biologist and botanist at the Indian Institute of Science Education and Research, IISER Bhopal, where she leads the Tropical Ecology and Evolution Lab. Her work sits at the intersection of plant evolution, ecology, and biodiversity with a special focus on how tropical plants diversify and adapt over time. Her research explores how floral and vegetative traits evolve, how plant pollinator interactions shape biodiversity, and how large scale historical forces such as the Himalayan uplift and the monsoon intensification have influenced the extraordinary plant diversity of regions like Northeast India and the Indo-Himalayan realm. Much of her work centers on plant groups such as the ginger family, Zingiberales, using a combination of field ecology, molecular tools, and phylogenetic approaches to uncover evolutionary patterns hidden into the nature. Beyond research, she is deeply engaged in mentoring students and building strong field based biology programs that connect molecular biology with real world ecosystems. Through her work, she continues to uncover how plants not only adapt to their environments, but also prove the history of landscape over millions of years. Thank you, Dr. Vinita. Shall we proceed towards the question sections of our conversation to
Sure.
explore in-depth insights?
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So the first question is, what first drew you towards studying plants and evolution?
Um, so I've said this. So first of all, I mean, thank you for having me here on your podcast. I will try to. I mean, what you've read is definitely very extensive, but it's also extremely scientific in the sense that it's possible that many people may not understand exactly what that means. So feel free to cut me if my statements are too technical, and I can break it down. I'll definitely try my best. So what drew me to plants and to botany is very complex question because I've said this in other forums as well, where I've been interviewed, that it was a combination of good teachers, bad teachers, in the sense that I did not take subjects where I did not have good teachers, and I ended up taking the subject and liking it more where I had good teachers. So botany, by far, I was lucky to have teachers who made an otherwise quite a boring topic quite interesting. They were very particular about being very precise, And I kind of liked the fact that, I mean, I'm someone who likes more precision and more care. And so when I saw that method of teaching, I think I was just unknowingly drawn to botany. Uh, was always kind of interested in biology and was drawn to nature. So between plants and animals, I have to say I wasn't as I got into my undergrad after my 12th, I was perfectly fine with dissections. There came a point where beyond a point, wasn't necessarily very happy about working with animals, and so therefore plants definitely was one of the options that was in front of me besides chemistry and such. So it wasn't really calculated at all. It just so kind of organically happened because of the teaching methodologies and my and I think in some sense after several decades I'm realizing that I always was surrounded with a very with a very nice green structure around me because my mom is a very fantastic gardener, and she's not a typical gardener in the sense that she doesn't necessarily manicure everything. She's always been very careful about picking a wild plant and then turning it into a horticultural plant within our house. So I realized that this only recently, that the plants that I was surrounded with did not necessarily come from seeds that she brought from the shops. It was from plants that she just found pretty on the street side, and then she would just collect it and bring it to home. So I think I just realized it, like I said, maybe somewhere that also worked. But yeah, so yeah, it was, and once you start understanding plants from the way I was taught, you realize that these are very, very alien creatures, very different from us. And so understanding plants requires a lot more effort than one can imagine. And we trivialize the complexity that they have. And so, yeah, so pretty much everyone who comes to my lab at some point gets hooked on plants. So we've been hooked for a while now.
Teddy, that is really wonderful explanation. It's actually fascinating how a simple curiosity can even actually shape an entire scientific career. Thank you so much for your wonderful explanation. Heading over to the next question, can you take us through your journey from student life to becoming a plant evolutionary biologist?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, okay, in some sense, I'm still a student because we still write new projects. We still are trying to figure out what is going on. So, like I said, as post my +2, I was very sure medicine was not my thing. And engineering was possibly the only other option that I would have considered. But circumstances led me to do a bachelor's in botany, zoology, and chemistry. And like I said, because of my undergrad teachers, I ended up doing masters in botany from Mangalore University. And there came a point where I wasn't really sure, because my training is in pure botany, a little bit of applied aspect of it, whether I wanted to go into molecular biology and look at, genetics of plants or genomics of plants, which was becoming, or genetics or molecular biology was becoming very interesting field and a buzzword at that time. Biotechnology was a buzzword. Microbiology was a buzzword. But it just so happened I wasn't completely convinced that's what I wanted to do for my PhD. So I took a break for 2 years. I worked as a JRF, Junior Research Fellow, in Center for Ecological Sciences in IISER. And it gave me a very strong perspective of what I want to be and what I don't want to be. And I will emphasize this also for all students who are thinking of this. As much as it's important to know what you want to be, I think it's equally important also what you don't want to be. And I think once I realized what I don't want to be, I think the path became just easier and simpler. So I kind of was moving towards ecology in general when I went to Center for Ecological Sciences, and my experience there kind of moved me back to botany. And so I ended up going to the US to the George Washington University and working with Dr. John Kress, who was at the Smithsonian, and Dr. Pat Herendeen, who was at GW. Both of them fantastic botanists. And I did end up working on an ecology project there, but it was strongly rooted in botany and our fascination of plants. So I took a break in ecology, but then I went back to botany. And again, wonderful teachers, both my advisors, all the mentors I met there, kept me rooted in what I wanted to do in botany. And there was a sort of there was a nice cheering crowd around me always during grad school, which kept telling me that, what we were doing was worth it. It was a good, it was good to persevere in that field. And the kind of questions that I learned to ask and asked during my grad school was very important in shaping what I do now in the lab. That is, we kind of lacked what I learned there. We still don't have much of that in India in terms of teaching that in botany. So I kind of knew when I was finishing my PhD that I wanted to come back to India and start a lab where I could train students for things that I did not have the train or get the training when I was a student in India. So it was very clear, and I always wanted to work in the Asian tropics. So when I was doing my PhD, it was very clear I wanted to come back to Asia. So when I got a chance, I did my first postdoc in the US and then second one in Singapore Botanical Garden. Again, since I did my postdoc in the Botanical Garden, I was completely surrounded with botanists, very, very strong botanists with a very good scientific background. And that just led me to IISER Bhopal. And IISER is a BSMS, integrated BSMS program that we give. So I get to work with undergrads. We have a PhD program. And so once I came here, it was just perfect, fertile ground for me to start my lab. And pretty much every project that we've touched has become quite nice. It has been very well worked by all my students. Everything that is there in my lab right now is thanks to all the good students that I've had. And I'm very proud that, the training that they've received, whatever it may be, I'm sure there are still things that I could have done better. I do think almost all my students are some of the best researchers that are there out there who can think evolution of plants and talk about plant evolution and so on and so forth. So yeah, it wasn't, it was kind of organic. Like I said, I happened to meet all the right people. And my PhD, I kind of did most of my work I did in the Caribbean islands, that is the Lesser Antilles, what we call as the West Indies. So even when I was working in the Caribbean islands, it was one of the most fantastic projects. It was pretty much island hopping from northern Caribbean island to the southern Caribbean island to Trinidad and Tobago, studying this plant hummingbird interactions. And although I was working on a very tight system, the entire forest was out there, to see and to feel and to understand. And the freedom I got as a student and kind of people I met in the West Indies, both researchers and hosts, and people who were interested in my research, made my entire interest in plants worthwhile. And I think what people don't realize is that there's a huge lot of people who are just absolutely mad botanists. They love plants, they know everything about plants, and they live and breathe plants. So I have to say I'm not still in that extreme level of a botanist, as I have met some people. But yeah, this is my sort of overall journey from India to US, the Caribbean, and then back into India as a faculty.
All right, that's really impressive. Traveling across different countries, different weathers, and different horizons, it's really a task. And it's actually an incredible journey from a curious student to contributing to our understandings of plant evolution. Heading to the next question, for someone outside biology, how would you explain what plant evolution actually means in your work? How is the plant evolution taken place over time, and what was the need as per the environmental change?
Right. So for an outsider, what I simply say is we're trying to understand a couple of things. The primary three things is if there's a species that is right outside your house or wherever you're located, we want to know is it native or is it non-native, right? And if it is native, that is, it belongs to that location, then our question immediately becomes, did that species evolve in that location? or, and is it still evolving, and who are its cousins, who is its family, how is it closely related to which other species, and how many relatives does it have. And the reason this is important for us is because it's simple as like what we see in all, let's say, human beings, for instance. Indians are everywhere, but we know we originate from India. So that's the simple idea of dispersal, right? And so in plants, we ask that question as well, that if you're native, then we also expect that the genetic diversity of that species in that location should be the highest. So we don't know if the plant is native, right? So in science, how do you go about figuring that out? Is we take the plant and we look at its genetic diversity. So we do kind of like reverse engineering. The species is already there. We look at, because the concept is already set, that the genetic diversity overall, in most cases, should be higher in its center of diversity or center of origin. And so there are multiple hypotheses, but if you went with that hypothesis, then wherever the species is, it should have the highest diversity. So we take the molecules, we take the DNA, we grind it, we look at the genes that we want to see, and we check if the genetic diversity is higher or not. And so if it's higher, and you had some other prior information, sometimes from fossils, sometimes from literature, sometimes from cave paintings, it could be anything. We kind of know that this species is native to that region, and of course, to also know the native, you also need to make sure that you check everywhere else that it doesn't exist, right? So let's say, for instance, if you came across Indians in Europe, and you never went anywhere else, you would imagine that Indians are originated from Europe. So you kind of need to go across the globe looking for that species and making sure that it's not found anywhere else. So that's what we do is find the nativity of the native space of that plant, and this tells us a lot about whether that region needs to be now conserved as a landscape because it has X amount of diversity. Now we know that the tropics has the highest, species diversity. So we do this over and over and over again for hundreds of species. And then we find out that, this location has at least 200 taxa that are very native to this region, which becomes a very important landscape then. And we take that information, give it to the forestry, and we advise them and say, while we know you want to, develop a town there and urbanize it, maybe you want to figure out some way to also conserve this landscape, or at least do ex situ conservation or in situ conservation, whatever it may be. So we go directly from doing the absolute science to conservation directly, and our outcomes are very, very direct. Like if we do a study, literally next year, we could actually be advising the forester or giving them a note to say what should be done. So that's one question. The other question is, like I said, what is a species? Which is a very, very, one of the most toughest question in biology is who draws that line saying this is a species as a taxonomist? So that's a very complex question. So we address that question as well using morphology and molecules, and we try to come up with some sort of a quantitative, although it's always going to be artificial format of saying, if X amount of variation is there, and if so much of, differences are there from this individual to this individual, maybe we should call this as a subspecies or a variety, or it is a different species. So we use what we call as evolutionary tree building methodologies, and we try to identify some amount of differences. And again, it's all artificial format, but that's the best we can do. There's no other way for us to know, because species as a definition is a moving target, right? So let's say if a mutation happens, you could have a completely new species tomorrow, right? And therefore, we know that new species are being formed, new species are dying on a daily basis by that logic, right? So what we do is then also come up with a quantitative way of saying what is a new species and why are you calling it a new species? So we question each other about when we should call it a new species, because it's kind of an artificial science in some sense. So we use methodologies, morphology, molecules. So one can say, for instance, let's say in human beings, let's say a Martian who comes on our Earth can technically look at us Indians and say, well, they look very different. They have big eyes, they have different kinds of nose, dark hair, and they're very different from the Caucasians. So maybe they are two different species, right? And so they may be right in saying we're different species, because according to the species concept, reproductive isolation is not necessary. Right. And so if that is the case, then The Martian can call us as one species, the Eastern Asians as another species, and the Caucasians as another species. But in our real world, we don't discriminate among our human species as three different species because of ethical reasons as well. So we don't have that ethical sort of a boundary when it comes to wild organisms, plants and animals. But yet you still have to prove and say, why are you calling it a new species? So we need morphological evidence, genetic evidence, chromosomal evidence, genomic evidence, and genetic evidence, all kinds. So we take this, what we call as a total evidence approach, and try to see when can we call it a new species. So whenever you see in the newspaper, someone says it's a new species, you want to actually go back and say, what evidences did the scientists use to call it a new species? If it's only morphology, you really want to kind of wonder and say, is that enough? Is the color difference enough for them to have called it a new species? And as students and as anyone, as a citizen as well, it's our job to question the rigor behind any such new species descriptions. And so that's what we do. The good thing of science is that whatever we do is in an open forum, we publish it, but anyone can also question it, reject it, rewrite the whole story. So the whole idea is we are rewriting and relearning about the biodiversity and how species have come to be. So it's a long process, but these are the two main questions that we look at in the lab, other than, of course, these plant-pollinator interactions, and then they form boundaries which can form new species, etc., etc. So there are many subsections that come through, but these are kind of the two main ideas that we start with. And now, of course, we work on plants, but also on animals, because the pollinators are linked to the plant, the herbivores are linked to the plant. So we don't really stop only at plants. I kind of usually tell my students that if anything is sitting or eating the plant that I'm working on, I'm going to study it. So if it's not on my plant, I don't care for it. So pretty much we also work on animals, therefore, if it's associated with our plants.
Alrighty, that is incredibly insightful. I think what stands out is that evaluation isn't a sudden event. It's a continuous conversation between plants and their environments unfolding over millions of years. Heading to the next question, your research often connects plants with history. What kind of history are plants actually preserving?
So this connects very much to what I just said. So the one big history that plants preserve, of course, is what happened on our Earth before the vertebrates came about, and also like our kind of, primates came about, especially the Homo sapiens. And so plants go about quite a few million years ago in terms of their evolution. Almost all species that we are working on are at least 7 to 10 million years old and older. So there are two things we get from plants. One is, of course, the fossils. And of course, the bones preserve better than plant fossils. But the plant fossils provide something different than what an animal fossil will give you. So let's say, well, in the sense that it also describes the habitat. And a lot of the extinct species have extinct plants, that is current plants as well. So you can match up and say, there's this palm-like plant or a banana-like plant. And if it was a banana-like plant in the fossil, then clearly it required more moisture and more tropical environment. So if you see a fossil which looks like banana-like, then you can kind of say, well, it must be wet. This region must have been wet and must be tropical-like, although right now we are in central India, right? It's a very dry, deciduous kind of a forest type, and dry environment as well. So plants preserve that history, but then what we're looking for is when climate fluctuations happen, there are two things that can happen. Either the species goes extinct, or it produces, or even including geological changes, it can produce sort of a momentum or a spark for species to diversify, because now new niches or ecological niches have been formed. That is, pockets of areas where there are microclimates. And so when you see sudden number of species increase over a long period of time, when you're seeing in 10 million years of evolution, you see this blip where, like, suddenly you see, like, 30, 40 species have come about, and in the last 5, 6 years, 6 million years, you can go back into the geology and say, what happened in that 6 million years ago? And so you can match your geological data that you have, for which we have a lot, because you can study rocks forever, and you can design and predict what the past environments look like, and now you can match it and say how many species came about, only why did so many species come about only in this small span of time, what happened. So then we connect the stories. It's almost like a murder mystery that you're trying to solve, right? We're trying to solve the past history of our planet by looking at these things and connecting the dots. So the evidence is not going to be right in front of your face. It never is, right? But so our job is to like take evidences from different places and say, I think this is what has happened. And then you write it, and then someone questions and says, no, this, the evidence is not enough. You're just cooking up a story. Go back to the lab and do something more. And so we build more stories, we build more data, and then we say that, we are very sure of what is happening. So in our case, for instance, what we built the story is about how plant diversity may have come about in the northeast region of India as well as the Himalayan region. So we know that the highest plant diversity right now is in the northeast of India and Western Ghats. So why are these two big biodiversity hotspots? What happened to the center part of India? Like, why is the center not biodiverse and not very specious in terms of plants? So we used this geological data, genetic data, to say the Himalayan uplift and possibly the monsoonal sort of intensification caused some kind of changes in the environment that possibly furthered speciation in that region, which is why we see high plant species. And of course, there must have been sort of connecting grasslands, because of which some of the species from the northeast also managed to get to all the way to Western Ghats. But then the environments changed, so that central India became a flat plateau, dry plateau, that they went extinct. So the combination of, evolution, evolved species being created, them dispersing themselves or traveling to a different region, and then becoming extinct. All of these stories together tell us about what has happened in the Indian subcontinent, So that's the history that we build. And the reason we want to build this again is it's great to say that go out and conserve the forest, but it's even more greater and better to actually say exactly why you need to conserve the forest, So it's important always to ask why. So I'm perfectly fine if someone came and said, I don't want to protect the Northeast, because you're going to just go and hug every tree and say, protect this. And you're giving me no information of whether this is an invasive species or not. And I think I agree with that. But that's why we built this data to say the Northeast region, the Western Ghats, and some of this, even Central India, are important regions, because it's what we see right now is a combination of millions of years of evolution. And so as a human species, when we come in and we destroy everything, perfectly fine to do that, as long as we are also taking responsibility that this will never come back, and the repercussions of that is also not known. So when you lose the biodiversity, what happens in terms of even disease spreading from the forest, we have absolutely no clue. So when we don't know about it, I think it's very important for us to study it before we meddle with what we consider as wild forests and regions and landscapes. So I'm hoping that what we've done so far in the last 13 years is going to be very important information fodder for anyone in the forestry divisions and ministries to see and say, no, all of these new species have come from this region. We're seeing that these are X number of millions of years old. These have very tight interactions within that local landscapes, and that makes that entire landscape worthwhile for us to protect. Because, I'm just looking at few species, but then everything else is also connected in the forest. So clearly then the connections is much, much, much bigger than what I've even managed to touch in the last 13 years. So that's how we go about from history to saying that history is what we want to preserve, and that history, just like we're trying to preserve all our historical monuments, every plant species for me, every tree is a monument, because it's hundreds and thousands of years old. And if you look at the root system, you'll see they're all connected. So they're families that we're trying to preserve when we say that we want to protect a particular forest.
Yeah, so that's a fascinating perspective. We often think of history as something written in books, but you have shown us that plants themselves are living archives of Earth's past. So
Mhm.
this is incredible, like, observing a plant grow and then observing that plant until it extincts
Yeah,
or until it gives birth to another plant
yeah,
is really magical cycle of universe as well.
yeah.
So thank you so much for explaining. And heading towards the next question, what are some surprising things you have discovered about tropical plant diversity, especially in India?
Um, Well, it's not too surprising for me because I think when I came back, I kind of knew, given the experiences that I had and what I've read and studied, until I came back, I knew what I was getting into. What has surprised me more is just that I came with a very open idea of it's going to be a very complex system, and what I'm facing is um, much, much, much more complex than what I had ever imagined. So I think difficulty of the problem that I'm facing in questions, in botanical questions that we're addressing is what is has mildly surprised me. But and otherwise, it's pretty much expected because India, in terms of plant diversity and evolutionary studies, is really an untapped region. Not many people have studied here. So the complexity is to be expected. But what we have found in the last couple of years is that even things that were known were not accurately documented. So we're still relying on colonial legacies and stories and data to know and understand whatever we know about our own plants. So that is a little surprising. So this the lack of coordination between what is historically known about our plants from tribals and locals to what is scientifically known from the colonial studies, those two have not come together. So as a technical detail, that is surprising to me. As about the plants, nothing surprises me because this is something that when you start working with plants, um, I mean, you've got to be prepared for everything, and that's what makes plant botanists very, very different from most other organism biologists. Because remember, in plants, I mean, you can regenerate it by cutting a branch, right? You can take a little bit of a bulbil and you can make a new plant. So we can clone a plant in the wild, in a pot, and in various forms. So plants can do many, many bizarre things. And we know also, I mean, JC Bose has done some amazing work on this, I mean, stellar work, where he also showed that they respond to sound, they respond to other stimuli, which means that there is like a sort of a crosstalk. So you can technically talk to a plant and they must be listening. But we don't know where the brain is. We don't know exactly what they're listening. Are they listening to my words or just vibrations? So here's an organism uh, which is very much animal-like, but we don't put it in animals because of the presence of chlorophyll and the lack of brain and many other structures. And yet it operates exactly in a very sort of give and take kind of an environment that you can it will respond back to the stimulus. And being recent studies have shown that a plant that is in stress produces different waves of sounds, which is pretty much like possibly sounds like you can anthropomorphize to say that it sounds like it's screaming, and it's possibly screaming to its neighbors and such. And what do the other neighbors do when it is in stress? We don't know in the forest, but we know now that there are some plants that when it's under stress, it produces volatile compounds that is picked up by the neighbor, and the neighbor kind of prepares itself for that stress just because it has heard someone scream. So it's really, I mean, plants is a very, very strange creature. And so what is surprised me is not so much about, as I was prepared with what to expect from plants, and every system that we've studied is new to science, believe it or not. And it just so happened, and that just shows how much we don't know about the Indian plants. And this is not just for us, it's also the larger botanical world has been unaware of certain ecological features that we have found in plants. And so I'm just hoping that we continue to discover for the next decades. And hopefully, I will be able to say that, I'm not going to be too surprised by what a plant is going to do. But, like I said, plants are very weird and bizarre organisms. So one should expect anything and everything from it. They become polyploids, which in animals is not a normal thing. So, you can have double the chromosome number, quadruple the number, 10 times the number. They can lose the number and then look different in all kind of things. So, yeah, it's in general for a botanist, nothing is surprising that a plant can do. But yeah, technically, as a field of botany in India, everything was surprising. That I was surprised that not many people knew about our plants. What we knew was wrong, and it needed to be restudied. And yet we were considered to be experts in that field. So all that part surprised me a lot when I came back to India.
All right, but of course, like you have traveled across different countries and understanding the psychology of plants, like how do they react to certain situation and environments and then weathers. So it's a in-depth research and it requires a ton of research first of all, because of the widened knowledge that you have, we are able to understand it very easily.
Yeah.
So thank you for this. And so this is actually remarkable. It highlights how India's biodiversity is not just rich in numbers but also rich in evolutionary stories waiting to be understood. Heading to the next question, is there any connection between the flora and fauna evolution to the mankind evolution?
Um, we almost always think I wouldn't be I wouldn't be the right person to answer that question, just because our human evolution is much slower in some sense than what the plant and the faunal evolution has possibly been. So I wouldn't be able to say exactly how we have evolved with the plants, but I can definitely say that the usage of plants in our daily life is always region specific, right? So, for instance, we tend to think that we use turmeric, and we use ginger a lot in our food, and we tend to think that this is a very Indian thing. Well, turns out the ginger world is a very large group of plant family, and there are thousands of species and hundreds of species that is eaten across the globe. Now, when you look at it across, whether it's Asia, Africa, or the Neotropics, or that is the South Americas and Central Americas, including North America, you see that the gingers are used for the same kind of medicinal traits. And so, in some ways, someone has eaten and figured it out that this is what is good for your throat, and then and then this is what has a pungent taste, so it will help in infection, and so it's so forth. So we do see a direct kind of a connection with plants and the individual tribes or human populations or groups that have consumed them. But what is interesting is that not everyone uses ginger the same way. Not everyone uses the same ginger as well. So let's say if you go to Southeast Asia, any Thai food or Korean food or anything you've eaten, you will see galanga in it more and than ginger. And you'll see less of turmeric. But then you come to India and we start seeing more of turmeric and ginger, and we don't use galanga anywhere. And we start using, but all cultures, for instance, across the globe, use the banana to wrap something and steam it. Right, so someone figured out that this leaf is not only broad, but it's all wide and wide, but it's also good in wrapping food and steaming it. People use the same for all curcuma. So no matter which, so turmeric is just one of the curcuma species. There are hundreds of species in curcuma, but there are other species whose leaf also people use to wrap, rice cakes or any kind of cakes and steam it. So it turns out that the utility of plants seems to have parallel evolved across different regions. So clearly then, by that logic, human evolution has been fueled by the plants, how they learned to consume it. learned to figure out that this is medicinal and this is poisonous, and I'm sure there's a connection there, but I don't specifically know what it is. I'm just starting to understand how plants have been used in the Indian subcontinent and how it compares with Southeast Asia and other regions, especially Africa as well. And we're just starting to contrast and say, well, we use it this way and someone else uses it this way. Why aren't we using galanga, for instance? So galanga, you can find it in northeast of India. So the northeastern cuisine has it, but somehow it didn't make it, past the northeast. So past West Bengal, you don't see galanga. So why did we stop using it? Is it because the plant doesn't grow well? Or is it because the taste didn't work for us? Or is it because the environment or the climate has changed and therefore it doesn't suit us? So these are all very difficult questions. We haven't looked into it yet. But there are a few labs that are starting to look at the association of climate, food, people, to see how our gut may have evolved with the microbiomes and may have evolved to digest some of these interesting plants that we are attached to right now. So.
Yes, already. This is really amazing. This really reminds us that humans are not separate from nature's story. So we are in one chapter within a much larger evolutionary narrative. Um,
Absolutely.
Heading to the next question, how do plant pollinator interactions shape evolutions in ways most people don't realize? Example, why are bees very important species for the whole ecosystem to exist? Are there any such plant species which are crucial for the whole existence survival?
Hmm. I mean, if I had to pick one plant, it would obviously be the grasses, because that's where all our food comes from. Our rice and wheat and all of those are grass species. So yes, without grasses, it would be very difficult for us to imagine our life form. So if I had to pick one, that would be one. Also, one of the most diverse and most species groups. So clearly, there is some kind of a evolutionary relationship with grasses, and that all the herbivores are eating grass. So it's like it's one big plant group that we absolutely cannot imagine our life without. So to say what is the interaction, well, so it's an interesting, uh, yeah, I don't know, it's like a chicken and egg question. uh, why pollinators are important and what is the role of pollinators. So let's say that let's put it this way: there are two ways a plant can move, right? Physically move. One is through its pollen, and second is the seed. So for the pollen to move, you need a pollinator. For the seed to move, you need an animal that will act as a disperser. So therefore, there are two innovations that we see in plants specifically. There are, of course, thousands of other, but two key for its reproduction, which is very important, is to produce flowers that are attractive so that some pollinator will come in and then do the pollination business for them. Now, the pollinator is not necessarily coming for pollination, because no one in the right mind wants to work. And the pollinator also does not want to work. So what the plant does is it's enticing the pollinator with a reward, and the reward is nectar and pollen. So the nectar is high sugar and the pollen is high protein, plus a lot of other micronutrients, which is also essential for them. So the reward is what the pollinator is coming from, and the flower decides, or the plant produces flowers that are completely contorted. They're designed such that if the pollinator goes in, it has to come out, and in that process, the pollen is picked up and deposited. So there's a lot of trickery going on to make someone work, right? So that's pretty much what it is. So it's pretty, imagine this like, if you wanted to feed a child something which is not good, the parents will do all of these, interesting, drama to, like, play like it's an aeroplane, and then the food goes into the mouth and the child doesn't want to eat it. So it's pretty much like that in evolution, that the flower is and the plant is doing all this trickery for the pollinator to do its business and do the business in the right form. It cannot make a mistake, because if you get the wrong pollen in the wrong place, there are two things that can happen. Either hybrids will be formed, in which case it's fine, or you may actually clog the stigma such that now there's no pollen tubes that are growing and no seed set. So you can't have a wrong pollen going in the wrong place. So not only does the plant want the business to be done, that is the pollen to be transferred to this to the female part, you know, but also in the right direction. So the bees have figured it out. There's some kind of synchrony that's going on in how much learning the bee can do. And the bees also tend to be uh, quite constant. There's a terminology we call as floral constancy or pollinator constancy. So the bee is constant towards a particular species of plant, and therefore it doesn't do these mistakes. And it's also almost like, you know, think of it as an example, like if you were in a new country, you would go to, and the only restaurant that you know is McDonald's and it's international, or something like the Udupi restaurant from India, which is international as well. You by default will, if there's an unknown restaurant and a known restaurant, you'll go to the one which is known. Why? You may not like the food, but you know what you're going to get on a menu. And so the bees are also using the same kind of a mental strategy, that when given two species, it prefers to go to the one that's known, and that develops into this learning, eventually leading into constancy. And so somehow all of these mechanisms together leads to this bees becoming very important pollinators. But that's not enough. If the fruit needs to go farther away, it also needs to be dispersed. So there's a second set of organisms that are the dispersers, usually rodents, you know, birds and bats and many, many other animals that actually take the fruit. And for that, what the plant has to do is produce a lot of pulp, which is why we have this very pulpy fruits, you know, like mangoes and apples and such, where the pulp is not for us. It's for the dispersers who's going to take the fruit and deposit it somewhere else, away from the mother plant, so that the competition is not there. So we look at it from the perspective of competition in ecology, where we say that the seed has to go farther away from the parent, so that the dispersal causes the seed to germinate better and establish itself better. So yeah, so the bees therefore are fundamentally important. And why outcrossing? Because we know that inbreeding has its problem. That is, and we know this in human species and many species we've seen it. If you marry, the concept of consanguineous marriages that we have in human beings, when you marry among cousins, you tend to retain mutations that may be harmful, and therefore you can see that overall the lifespan or disease levels or percentages goes up in inbred population. So the bees are also genetically kind of important in producing this genetic variance and diversity in that species. So, and since they fly very far away, bees and also birds, like some birds that pollinate and hummingbirds that pollinate and many, many other species, moths do the pollination work, anything that pollinates and goes far away, is also adding to this idea of genetic diversity. So yeah, so therefore the pollinators are important for the plants, because plants technically don't move, but they move using these two mechanisms, is pollination mechanism and dispersal mechanism. So when we study plants, these two are very fundamentally important, because the great thing about plants for me as a botanist is that if I study a plant today, tomorrow it's going to be found exactly at the same spot. So I like that static part about a plant. And what I did not like about working with animals is that you had to run behind it. And you didn't know where it was. So you had to tag it, you had to find it. While in a plant, it's right there. But yet it's moving using this pollen and dispersal mechanism. So it's the complexity can be uncovered only if you did very nice genetic experiments and molecular sort of investigation. So I found that combination quite fascinating, even as a scientific approach, that I can do both ecology and molecular work and figure out where the plant is going, how far it's going. So I hope I answered the question, because I know the question was the bees, but it's not just bees. It's like bees is one large group in
Yeah. No. That was absolutely amazing. It had a powerful explanation of the bees and the species. It also shows us how even the smallest interactions in nature can have enormous consequences for the survival of entire ecosystem, including our own. Moving to the next question, what are some of the most exciting developments in your field today?
One of the most exciting field for me right now is that we're back to kind of questioning what are old species concepts, as in what is a species, how are they evolving, uh, what are the features that you will expect a plant to modify given the climate change crisis that we have. So those are some very interesting questions in the plant world right now. And also the second field which still remains undiscovered and very underexplored is how plants communicate with each other. And if we can figure out using roots as well as that is underground and overground communications, if you can figure out what's going on. It's very, very, very tough. But there have been studies that, where people have shown that the roots are obviously also communicating. So here is an organism where you're only looking at the above ground and thinking all the communication is happening there, and you're completely ignoring what happens underground. So I think the most exciting is if someone can really connect how the roots communicate and as well as what's happening above ground, and tell us how exactly what is the role of a single tree in a forest, right? Because it's communicating with roots through microorganisms and through physical roots. And above ground, it's communicating physically as well as through volatile profiles and all these sound profiles that possibly is going on. So for me, that is absolutely fascinating, and more and more people are starting to get into this very complex world of what's going on. So I don't know if all of you have seen the movie, the Lord of the Rings. There's this very nice sequence of the trees that are like also getting into this war, and they're walking and they're talking. And so for me, I think that's not just a graphical interpretation of something. I think that could be real in the sense that I think organisms know and plants know what is around. And it's just that the response is something that we as human beings are not able to detect, and are also not wanting to detect, because if someone told me that I was boiling a vegetable and screaming, it would be very difficult for me to eat it. So there's been a lot of, long-term repercussions of us as human species being saying, that I can chop a plant, I can cook a plant, but I will not eat an animal. So I think that whole moral dilemma is there if we associate sentiments and emotions with plants, and that they can actually be talking. So that for me is a very fascinating and new world. We haven't worked on anything of that kind, but yeah, I hope by the end of my career I'll somehow get to that one way or the other.
Alrighty, thank you so much. So the pace of discovery in this field is truly exciting and commendable. It feels like we are entering an era where technology is allowing us to answer questions that were unimaginable just a decade ago. So now here, I would like to love from audience. So this is your time to go, audience. Somalia, can you please take over the stage?
I hope I'm clear and audible.
Yes, I can. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are very great questions here, and so some of them I would like to take. One, just a second, I'll adjust the view. Yeah. So, ma'am, Gagan King, he has asked that, ma'am, with climate change, is there faster shifts in plant traits, and how can we detect such changes in real time?
In real time. So with climate change, there are a couple of things. I mean, what we see, the easiest way to do is go to sensitive areas such as higher elevations, right? Where technically these are very specialized plants as you go up in the elevation because they're cooler environments and such. And climate change is basically if it's warming up that location, then the easiest way to look at it is whether the density of the species is going down. That is, we are seeing more mortality in terms of trees or organisms. That's an easy sort of way we detect and say, oh, look, climate change is real. Um, the plants are not, are receding in the tree line, for instance. The second is you can start seeing changes in the flowering and fruiting phenology, right? So phenology is basically the the idea that or the timely cycles that you see in any organism. So flowering phenology means that the flowering time period or the season. So I'm sure you've all heard about it, that that seasonality is changing. Now there are two things. It could be changing because there's a cyclical event, right? Like one tree that flowers one year doesn't necessarily flower next year. So there's a cyclical pattern, and then there's a pattern that is broken because of climate change issues. So what we do is we establish some of these long-term study areas where we go and look at the flowering phenology again and again and again, match it to climate and say the climate has shifted, has the plant also shifted its flowering? So when we see that shift, we say that it's climate responsive, and so it's good to see the response, but sometimes that could be harmful. So for instance, your overall flowering time that you get may be less, and you may get very heavy showers, in which case the pollinator is going to get knocked off. So there are many features that we can detect in this way. But if you look at flowering phenology, or what we call reproductive phenology, and overall, demography or density of species in this sensitive regions, then that gives you a very good idea of whether climate change is having an effect on plants or not.
Yeah.
Are very resilient. That is one good thing. But once they die, they don't come back. And when you lose a tree, you lose hundreds of thousands of years of worth of life. While in an animal, they have the advantage that if something is not right, they may actually move. So that lack of mobility in a plant means that death is quite a last step.
Yeah. Second question is, ma'am, what plant-animal interactions have you came across in your research journey, which you found very interesting and want to share it with us?
So I mean, one of our work is going to be out soon. Is we've looked at this night pollination by moths in this laterite plateaus of Maharashtra. So one of my students, Dr. Saket Shrotri, studied it during his PhD, and so this is a plateau where we have different colored, the same species but in different colors, right? So imagine a red color form and the white one and an intermediate one, and this is all happening at night. So obviously color is not functional in some sense in that night, not this absolute color that I'm talking about. So what we discovered is, or what Saket and us discovered together, is that the moth is able to identify, or well, the moth visits randomly, but when it arrives at one of the morphs, because of the higher nectar production and other features, it recognizes it and keeps coming back. And so the morphs are different, and the moth manages to find it, and there's some kind of feature, that is random, but the moth is able to tell that this is a sweeter dessert and that's not a very sweet dessert, and it gets addicted to one of them more than the other, and then it keeps visiting. And when it visits the same plant again and again, it causes pollen to move within the plant, so there's kind of reproductive outcomes of it. That is, there'll be more inbreeding there than the other species which has less sweet nectar. So it's kind of a very interesting one, that the species that is the morph which is most common does not produce the sweetest nectar, but the advantage it gets is that because it's not sweet, the moth moves on, and therefore it gets possibly higher outcrossing. While the one that produces more sweet nectar possibly is more inbred, but it's also one of the rarer form. So once it's discovered, the moth keeps coming back. So it's a very counterintuitive sort of a story that we found in this schema in the Western Ghats.
So, ma'am, there is no more audience question. So, two questions I have from my end. Sir, one question is, currently there is a use of AI, and so how AI plus human use can be used in the study of ecology?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm not a big fan of AI just because I don't know what AI is. I mean, exactly why do I need to know AI for what? I mean, I just don't know. I mean, see, AI is an application, right? So it's pretty much like saying, I will use Word or I'll use LaTeX to write a program. So if that's what you mean, then I'm sure AI has an application in ecology. It's up for us to figure out where that application is. For me, we are still trying to understand species which we know nothing about. So I don't know what AI is going to give me. So it's of course, so it's going to give me, let's say, a map from all things known in plants. It's going to tell me that there is going to be a species which will have this feature. There's going to be a species which will have this feature. That's what it can give me as artificial intelligence, right? But where exactly is that species? Is something that I still need to go to the forest and figure out. So I don't see the point of AI as of now, because there's a lot more to discover in the field than in on our data on our computers. We do use AI and ML in our data set when they are very large data sets, and for analysis sake, we use machine learning. So we do machine learning only to, like, the volume of the data needs to be very high. But turns out in ecology, no matter how big the data set is, it's not very big, right? So it's not like a tremendous huge data set that I need to do massive machine learning on. So right now, I'm not really seeing much use of AI and ML, and people may say they use it, but I think what is really required, and more so now in the AI and ML world, is get out more often and go into the field and go into the forest. So I kind of will sort of be brash and say that I kind of don't need AI ML right now. I need people to use their own brains to tell me what is that species, you know, because those questions we have not answered yet, and we don't know the features yet. So, and remember, like, there's a classic world in biology where you have to do dissections, you have to look at the structure, you have to, like, figure out what is going on inside, and that cannot be replaced by AI and ML right now. It can only make predictions, which is not going to be useful really.
Yeah, ma'am. The second question which I have, the currently we are surrounded by concrete jungles. What advice would you like to give the government for further sustainable development?
So there is already sort of multiple suggestions that the government has already taken. I mean, I'm sure they've received this. Is to manage some kind of a green space in every location. So let's say take a city, and you're supposed to break that city into smaller sections and say every section requires a garden. And that's why we have these walking areas, So you see that in most cities, they are expected, the urban developers are expected to have a garden. And a garden is a green space, because if you start putting too many big trees on the avenue, they will break the roads, because the roots are very strong system. So you can't put a people tree, in the middle of the city, because it will go into your sewage and it will break the roads. So there has to be very careful planning of native species inside the cities at regular intervals, which are also maintained. So if you go to, let's say, countries like Singapore, which is a country city, or almost, you can imagine, it's very green, extremely well planned. Most plants are not native, but it was an island which was almost barren. So they've repopulated that entire island and made it into green space. If you see their air quality, that's the air quality that we should be having in India, which already has real forests. We have our ancient historical old forests, and we're not able to get that airspace or breathing quality that Singapore has, which is all introduced in the last few hundred years. So that is something that we want to really self-reflect a lot. That is, how could they create and give that airspace to their own people when we are not able to give, when we actually have natural forests, and large spaces of forest. So that recommendation, I'm sure that the government already has. There's an entire ministry dedicated to this. MOEFCC's job is this. So I'm sure they have urban planners and botanists and biologists like me, who hopefully should be giving them advice, and they've taken the advice that, urban planning, you need to have trees, but they need to be trees that don't give allergies. The pollen can give you allergies. But at the same time blocks and filters the air in some form. And that we don't need these artificial systems to clean up the air. We need natural systems that is more sustainable and manageable.
Okay, ma'am. So we have one last question. Does rare or endemic species evolve traits differently compared to widespread species? And follow-up question would be: does population size or individual number matter in evolution of traits?
Yes, both. Yes, both. For both the questions, the answer is yes. Rare and endemic species evolve very differently because they kind of localized, right? So the traits become very specialized to that location and to the pollinators, to the dispersers. So we often find that the traits are specialized in endemic species, while in a generalist species, it's like I said, it's widespread and it's the traits are generalized. And so that's also why invasive species are everywhere because they've modified their traits such that they can survive in any environment. So you can take an invasive species, put it in the desert, and still grow in very less water. And you can, and their seeds have this capacity to be recalcitrant. That is, they can go through high stress and a little bit of water, and they'll germinate. Right. While an endemic species is very, very, very picky. So think of it that way, that it's a specialist and a generalist. And so the widely distributed species also has far more generalistic characters. That is, the flower, it will keep flowering multiple times in a year. It produces thousands of seeds such that it can propagate faster and establish itself. So the traits are definitely different in endemic and widespread species. And I think the population number of individuals definitely matters because it's like anything else, right? So there's this nice idea of genetic drift. That is, if the number of individuals in a population is very small, imagine what is going to happen. Everyone is going to mate with everyone right there, right? So that's going to be inbreeding, right? So the inbreeding now, like what I mentioned before, has its repercussions in how the species evolves and how its genetic diversity is going to be shaped. So it matters a lot, which is why we're worried a lot about our tigers and elephants and such, because if we don't control the poaching or whatever is causing their death, number of the overall population size is going to go down, and that's going to affect the species itself and its survival. So the number matters a lot.
Yeah. So over to Dharini, you can take the stage.
Yes, I think I have one question, if you permit me. It's just that I was watching, Chanakya Niti, and my question to you is that how were those ancient, preachers or gurus were able to identify the species of the plant which will be able to heal, because most of the time it was that there were kings who were fighting over kingdoms, and there were lot more different kings that entered our Indian territory. So my question is how, and like how, what was the sequence, or were there any specifications given into any book, any medicinal book that that Chanakya or any preachers got to know that how to use this particular medicine?
Text. Well, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of history texts, including, like I said, even our rock paintings have bees and plants, drawn in it. So think about it this way, simply put. If you were given a chance to carve something on the rock, right? It's a very tedious job. I think it's a very strong thought process of what plant you're going to represent there. And that plant usually is something that's going to be important for you. So, well, we nowadays we have a pen, so you may randomly draw a rose because that's what you would equate to, I don't know, romance or whatever. But back in the days, romance was the last thing on your list. Your thing on the list was survival. So medicinal plants then always had a very high strata in any world, right? So it's very well known that, let's say, dhatura and few other plants that we consume, that we give on our temples to are species that did not originate in India. In fact, they came from Central America and South America. So the question is, how did these plants come to India? And how do we associate these plants with Shiva? And remember, like the Shiva is our most colorful and amazing gods, where I think he's probably the only botanist god that we have, because he has consumed or used lots of plants one way or the other, right? So he uses, poppy seeds, he uses, datura seeds, and these are all intoxicating plant species. Now, plants that are intoxication. So think of it this way: any plant that is medicinal is also poisonous, right? Because anything that you take an overdose of is going to kill you. That's true, right? So think of it that way, that how these plants got around. So medicinal plants got around very easily, because if you were a traveler the first thing that you will do, let's say even if now you're going from home to your hostel, one of the kits that you'll definitely have is your medical kit. And that's true back in the days as well. And that medical kit back in the days was the seed or the plant. And so people carried these seeds from one place to the other when they took their boats and traveled and navigated long distances. And that's how the plants got around. Quite a few plants like coconuts just floated in the water and got around. But the medicinal plants that we consume have gone through in this particular process. That is, they've actively possibly picked by the human beings who have moved from one place to the other. So all of this information, word of mouth, or in written text, or in graffitis, exists from the time that human being has possibly existed. So that's why botany, the idea of botany, botanical knowledge, or ecology, or biology predates any microscope, right? Because we talked about it. And so therefore this science becomes very difficult in the real world to work on. Because let's say if I wanted to reference, remember in science we refer to what has happened in the past and we say so and so said so. Well, I can go to a rock painting and say the reference for the use of bees as for honey goes back as far back as the rock painting, because I can see an image there. So in the classic sciences like botany and zoology and also in modified sciences like ecology, references go back as far back as human history goes. And so there is no single text that one may want to refer to, because different regions came up with different texts. So we have so let's say homeopathy, people tend to think it's Indian, it's not, it's come from Germany and other places. And so there's those texts. There are people who use Unani medicines, Ayurvedic medicines, and everything in intermediate. That East Asia has its own set of medications. So this is why travelers were such important people, right? They were considered to be the most intelligent people because they traveled and they learned and they carried that information. So that's how information exchange has happened. So a textbook is great, but just like now I will say, textbook is there to help you, but it can't be everything, right? And I wouldn't believe that one text will give you all the information in the world. So it's for the reader to kind of read it. And I think that's how all this medicinal information and information of plants, even animals, how to eat an animal came about. And I mean, I usually joke, and I'm sure it's true. I'm sure for every plant that we're eating, someone has died, tasting these plants and figuring out that this was not poisonous. So if we are eating it, someone has paid the price for it, and has been a taster who said, "Oh, I ate the wrong grass and killed itself," or something like that. So I'm sure what we are seeing now is just like a very, very, very advanced stage of how plants are there on our plate, and what we're eating and what we know is not poisonous, and so on and so forth. And more you go into this, let's say even now, if you go to the small markets where all the farmers come and bring their produce, it's different from when you go to a grocery shop in a shopping complex, because there all your tomatoes look the same. And I'm pretty darn sure most current generations and some past can't tell the difference between what is going to be a bitter cucumber versus a cucumber which will not be bitter. But when you go to the smaller farm, your parents, your grandparents will be able to tell how to distinguish it. So we, in a sense, everyone who is a botanist is, because they can tell the difference. So
All right, thank you so much. That was a super explanation. So I think, Somelia, are there any questions left from the audience side?
Last question. One audience is requesting, ma'am, if you have time. Ma'am, the person is asking, can you brief about the recent publication of July 2026 on castor plant and ant interaction, and can you please make them understand they are like a undergraduate students?
I think it will take longer than that. So I will, yeah. How about you call me and we talk about it. So in the castor species, basically what we did, or what Pooja did, who's the first author, that was her PhD work. What she did is basically she tried to look for traits that may be changing as the plant shifts from one latitude to the other. And there are few structures that is produced on the leaves of the castor plant, which the ant uses to forage. So there's an ant-plant interaction where the plant gives a reward to the ant and it feeds on those rewards. And in return, the ant is protecting that plant, right? Because ants are very kind of ferocious animals. And this happens time and again whenever there's an ant organism interactions. That is, the plant is getting the protection and it's also giving a reward to the organism. So what she was studying is looking at a change in the traits as we went from northern latitude to southern latitudes, and she was trying to correlate with these traits with whatever are the plant traits that were present in the castor plant. So it's all about looking for correlations across latitudes and saying, whenever we see the ant, do we see the traits in the plants? And does that mean that the relationship between the plant and animal is a tight one or a slightly lax one or a loose one? So we often try to look at these correlations because somewhere we want to use that correlation in the longer eventuality to look at whether the species are co-evolving. Right? So the idea was to somewhere look at this interacting partners and see if we can talk about coevolution. It was far more complex story than that. But what she did was she did use something called path analysis. And this is a very interesting way of looking at it, is you take different points in the lifespan of the plant and also the animal, and you put these points and say, this path is like path A to B, is it affected by the interaction between the two species? Then you go path B to C, is it affected by the interaction between these two species? And you slowly build this network. And what we found out is that there is some kind of an effect of plants on ants, on the traits that is being selected on each other. So that is the long story short. Sorry, you muted, I think.
Harini, you can continue with your take the stage and continue with the vote of thanks.
All right, yeah. So first of all, as we come to the end of today's enriching session, I would like to take a moment to express our heartfelt gratitude to Dr. Vinita Gowda. Dr. Vinita, thank you for taking us on a fascinating journey through the world of plant evolution, biodiversity, and ecology. Your ability to explain complex scientific concepts with such a clarity and enthusiasm has made today's discussion both enlightening and inspiring. From understanding how plants preserve the history of our planet to exploring the intricate relationships between plants, pollinators, and ecosystems, your insights have been a deeper appreciation of the nature world around us. So, on behalf of the Scicomm Synapse, I extend our sincere appreciation for your valuable time, your valuable knowledge, and your willingness to share your remarkable journey with us. It has been truly been an honor and privilege to host you today. And for the wonderful audience, I would also like to thank you all for showing up your enthusiasm, your participation, and thoughtful questions, which made this session even more engaging and meaningful. And with that, we wrap up our today's episode of the next experiment. Thank you, everyone. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring. And we would really appreciate if you can take a moment to really share your feedback for the next event to make it better and energized one. There's a link of feedback form in the comments to receive e-certificates, and you'll be given the e-certificates only if you fill in the feedback form. Until then, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more information. You do visit www.thescicommsynapse.in. Until then, think, share, and grow.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right, see you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
Thank
you. Good day. Bye.
you. Oh, God, bye.
Yeah.